Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. CarrieLynn, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Sure. Good morning, everyone, or at least good morning for where I am right now. My name is CarrieLynn Reinhard. I'm a PhD in communication from Ohio State University, and I'm currently a professor of communication arts and sciences at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois, just outside of Chicago.
Can I ask what's your interest in communication?
So when I was an undergrad, I went in as pre-med. And it didn't take long for me to realize I didn't want to be pre-med. One analytical chemistry class definitely kicked that out of me. And I took a communication class. And in taking that class, I realized just how much I had been influenced by media in particular, but by communication overall. So I kind of became obsessed with communication, with the media. And when I got my undergrad done, I then went to Hollywood for a while because I thought I wanted to work in Hollywood. But I became very fascinated in fans and in audiences, and this was 2000 to 2003, so everything was starting to blow up for fans at that time. So I really wanted to understand more about how fans came about, which is largely communication. There's a lot that goes into fan studies, which we can talk about. But I was really interested in how people make sense of life and themselves and each other. And since all social interaction is some form of communication, communication seemed to be the most apt for what it was I was interested in.
Have you ever tried to rank the ways that we communicate, like from least to, I guess, least important? I wouldn't say least important, actually, just the worst way we communicate compared to the most effective way that we communicate. I would put conversation or just vocally speaking to each other probably at the top of the list. But the way that society has kind of gone, it seems like we do a lot of our stuff through voice text or text messaging, which honestly, I'm probably the anti of my generation to say that that's probably the worst way to communicate. Because I feel like if you're driving, you're doing it and the message never comes out like you want it to, and there's no way to really convey emotion through your phone. So like if you tell someone like, hey, can you go to the store? It can just be like, go to the store. And then it comes off like you're yelling. And then it's like, next thing you know, you get into an argument where you have to pull over on the side of the road. Like, what happened? I don't know where the message got lost in translation.
Well, and the thing is, I don't really see a communication style as being necessarily good or bad. All communication is going to be situated. It depends on what's happening within a particular situation. And for some situations, certain communication technologies are going to be more effective for the goal the person has in that situation. But rather than try to say, well, this communication technology is always going to be bad or this one's always going to be bad, I want us to remember that there's still a person behind all of it. I mean, the advancement of AI in the past several decades, it's less maybe people involved sometimes, but there's always a person involved in it. And there's always the possibility of understanding one another. But I also have a psychology degree, so I also understand the extent to which people may not want to or may not be able to do the work necessary to get to that understanding. So when we don't want to try to understand another person, that then can be a compounding factor. It makes the effect of a technology worse. So in that situation, like you just described, if the individuals in having that conversation are not intending to understand what the other one is saying, then texting, which is devoid of any type of emotional inflection or anything like that, I mean, yes, we have ways to try to replace all of that, but it's still void of all of that. It could lead to misunderstanding, miscommunication, and then depending on how the people respond, defensiveness and anger and all of these other things as well. I wouldn't say it's the technology's fault. I would say that something else is going on in that situation that is leading one or more of the communication participants to not want to engage in the work that's necessary to really understand one another.
Would be on edge be a good example, like the public being on edge? I notice that a lot more with just people that might take a miscommunication, and I can see the lack of interest. I think if you're ever like talking to someone in a romantic sense, if one person's interested and the other party is not interested, typically there's like a kind of like one word responses, or there's like a long period of time where there is no response, where the other one might be 100% there in contact wise. But in an open communication sense between two friends, you guys could be best friends talking about one thing, but then there's a deciding factor of a topic. And if that topic could divide the two, then you see I've had friends of mine that go and immediately go sour on a certain topic, and one that in particular that I stand hard in, and I'll keep going until you understand kind of my point of view about, which I don't have a lot of those topics. But it does that mean that it's the relationship is sensitive, or does that mean that everyone's sensitive? Because I start seeing that there's a lot more debates that happen in a discourse rather than communication and trying to understand the perspective.
Mhm. I mean, it could also be that, there's just something going on at that particular time, at that particular place where the individual or individuals, I mean, we all have bad days. We all have bad situations that come upon us. Like, I am immensely tired right now, and I'm doing my ultimate best to be understandable, which I fall back on a lot of my teaching experience to be able to do so. But if I was having an even worse day, I might not be able to. And it's tricky because I think oftentimes, especially when we are engaging with people maybe we don't know as well, which is definitely people that we know online who are complete strangers,
Nice to meet you.
we will tend, yeah, we will attempt to attribute a negative thing to them as part of their character rather than see it as a situational factor. So we tend then, let's say if we go into the realm of politics, which no, that doesn't happen at all, when you have individuals from different political backgrounds engaging with one another and getting into an argument, getting into a contentious discussion over some specific topic, rather than see it as perhaps a factor of the situation, of the time and the place and things like that, we start to see our problems in communicating as about the other person. So they're unable to listen. They lack empathy. They're stupid. They're trolling. They're all of these different things, which may be true, but it might be even more true that they're having a bad day. They don't have the energy right now to do the extra work. Maybe they don't have the skills, because we don't teach communication skills terribly well, at least in the United States. So there's a lot of different reasons for why communication can fall apart, but we tend to rely on it's either the technology or the other person without trying to understand all of these other factors that could be at work, because the more complex the problem, the more complex the solution that's necessary, and we don't have the time or the resources for that.
Have you ever thought with social media platforms if there was kind of like a, let's say, an inherent response to fighting, just because of the character limits on things and the way that the platform is kind of distributed? Like there was a long time ago, there was a survey that was done about the Facebook symbols, the like symbols and all that. And they were going to add a dislike button at a point, but they made the angry emoji because they realized that they get more interaction if they get that angry emoji. And it's not saying like everything's rigged, but there's also a point like it's just like being on like news, for instance. I think news is important if you want to blow up as well too. But at the same time, when they give you 10 minutes to talk about something that might need way longer than 10 minutes, like when I had Mark Duffett on, he was like, I've refused to do news stations because they only want little bits and sound bites, but you give me an open platform. There is not a lot of that. And it's very, very easy to make one simple mistake and then want to go back to it and be able to correct yourself. But that's just, I don't know if that's attention spans or if that's just the way that they found that they can get good sound bites and keep it rolling along through the day so they don't waste a, hour on something.
I mean, part of it may be attention spans, but in the sense that there's so much content out there that if you're not keeping someone's attention long enough, they're going to go away from your platform or channel or whatever it is where the content is. So you need to constantly refresh that content in order to keep people on. It's a concept of stickiness. You need to keep them sticking to you, eyeballs glued to you, so that you can charge the advertisers the money that you want to charge to get the money that you need to produce the content. Classic marketing capitalism that we have. The extent to which it's the platform's fault. See, now platform to me is different than technology. Platform is like Twitter, is Facebook, is TikTok, and so forth. So it's the company behind the technology. TikTok is not that different from what YouTube used to be. So it's still just video sharing.
They allow up to 10 minutes now. On TikTok, they allow up to 10 minutes of video. That's insane.
Well, and it's like YouTube. YouTube started off, you could have short, and then it got up to 10, and 10 was the big one, and now it's like infinite, it seems like.
They just added podcasts on there too, so you can now do a whole separate category for podcasts.
Which is really confusing my students, so I'm very glad that YouTube is doing that. but it's those are business decisions, right? I mean, the technology is still just video sharing. But then the character limit or the time limit, that's the business decision. And part of it is this need to keep people on the platform. And any way that you can keep them engaging with the content is the way then to keep them on the platform. So YouTube is famous for the algorithms that were having people go down rabbit holes of conspiracy theories. They didn't care because it's an algorithm that was designed to keep people on the platform. That's all that they cared about. The same then goes for TikTok, Facebook, Twitter. The algorithms are designed to keep you on the platform. The engaging is designed to keep you there. But then we also know that can relate to not just rabbit holes, but the filter bubbles leading to echo chambers and all of these problems where you don't then have people engaging with and talking with content and people who are different from them. So that then fosters more of a problem of communicating because, as I tell my students, and this is what I get from my mentor, if everyone was the same, if we were all the same experiences, all the same thoughts and feelings, there would be no reason to communicate. Communicating is only necessary when there's a difference, when there's a gap between people. So the more that you don't have those gaps that you encounter, the less you have to work on your communication skills for understanding. And I really would love platforms to understand that aspect, but until there's financial incentive to do so, there's really no reason that they're going to.
Can you explain how you came across like just wanting platforms to understand that? Like did you just notice it through picking it up and being on the platforms and noticing that there was kind of like these, like for me, I have content that goes all over the board, but I have ADHD. So I'm not necessarily thinking about what people think. Like people think, oh, right wing, left wing. I get in trouble and I get labeled. I denied doing Tucker Carlson because I didn't want to be right wing at all because he was talking about all the JFK stuff that I'm interested in. But there's a serious thing when it comes to people don't want to go after something that doesn't fit their views a lot of times, where now political sense has become ideology like religion. The only hate I've ever really gotten have been from religious groups and from because I at one point I talked about with a researcher who studied the Satanic Temple. Now look, I ain't anything religious wise, but you actually start listening to the Satanic Temple, your perspective would start changing a little bit. It's not necessarily worshiping Satan like it sounds. It's a provocative religion because they just didn't want to conform to something. Like they've had more violent acts against them than they've ever done anything violent, where I start going, it takes a lot to even get past reading that description of what it is to actually hear it out and then understand, okay, they are provocateurs in a sense, but at the same time, they're not hurting anybody with violence. They're having violence on them, but that's not attractive to people. A lot of people immediately just didn't even listen, just immediately started attacking that specific episode on that, where I go, I don't know about like how much worth your time is. I mean, I appreciate you doing my show, but my time is I'm so expendable with it. I'm up like 23 hours a day. I could toss it out like it's anything. And that's when talking to someone is like one of the most important things I've started to value, where the best thing I can offer you is the thing that I do hold a lot and appreciate, which is my time. But also, I don't view it as like, if it's not helping me out, then it's not worth it. And I've noticed that with a lot of people my age, where it's like my time can only be for me, and it's like, well, oh God, I mean, I get it, but at the same time, you got a job you got to do at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, there's confirmation biases, which help to explain why people are reluctant to engage with ideas or information or anything that isn't related in some way to what they already believe in. But then what you were just talking about makes me think about, if you look at the history of human civilization, at least the current iteration of human civilization, we have for far longer been isolated individuals. We haven't really had a lot of experience talking with people outside of maybe an immediate circle. And that could be family, it could be a more immediate neighborhood or things like that. So, smaller communities. We didn't have this type of long distance communication until books started really becoming popular more in the 1700s. But then you get newspapers, and even then you have to have the ability to read. Not a lot of people had that back then. When you get telephones coming in after telegraphs, then you start getting even wider ranging technology that allows a lot of people to connect with each other. Telephones don't require you to be able to read, you just have to be able to speak, and that's something we're basically taught to do from the moment we're born. So you get into the 20th century, and now you've got technologies that allow anyone to start communicating with anyone else. But we still have this long history that we only want to communicate with our community, with those who are like us. We still don't have a big history of communicating with people who are different from us. That starts to change when the World Wide Web builds on the internet infrastructure. So the 1990s, you have the World Wide Web start rolling out. And then you start getting people in more chat rooms, discussion boards, message boards. You have people starting to make websites. And then you get the Web 2.0 revolution in the early 2000s. And now you have a lot more people communicating. But we still don't have the history or the literacy for how to engage with people who are different from us. It's not taught, and we don't have the experience with it. Again, when we go to the online communities, it's tending to be online communities of things and people that we already know and like. So we don't have that background that helps us to understand how to go beyond our comfort zone, how to challenge our confirmation biases and all these other biases that we have. And until we do more to address that from a literacy perspective, we're going to continue to see these problems and platforms doing what they do to try to police their spaces so that they keep advertisers and kicking people off. They're just going to kick people off to go and create a new community somewhere. And that community is even less likely than to engage with difference at that point. So until we're better at educating about difference and understanding difference, we're not going to have the type of communication that we could be having with all of these technologies that are at our disposal now.
Now, with teaching that, you mentioned already with ads and kind of people trying to, stay in their respective attitudes towards their ad companies and where they get their revenue. But the only example I could ever think of was the debates, which was like a political example, but it was like, it's not a platform for discussion. It's just a platform for shouting. It's like if you really wanted to get two people together and actually talk about serious problems and all that, you wouldn't have these segments where people could talk over each other. And it is a good moderator as well too, would help in a lot of those. But it's the word even in itself. To me, I would just relabel the whole thing. It doesn't sound right. When I've tried to host a couple debates before, I thought I could do it well. But nobody wanted to go to it because it is a debate and everyone starts kind of wondering what your bias is in the whole thing. And it's try not to have one, if you can listen to the respect of the information, but also it creates grudges. It creates relationships that go down bad roads to the point where they could have debates that aren't debates. They're just going to be shouting matches between each other. And I was curious if you had any other examples that you've noticed, things that we could change when it comes to opening up the door for people to be able to understand perspectives. Or, I mean, I can give you one last example. My buddy Brandon, he goes a little bit too drama into the conspiracy side of things on purpose. He hypes it up a little bit. And he mentioned something where I stopped him and I was like, what are you talking about? Because like I'll balance him with that stuff, but he's a good friend of mine. And he was like, every train derailment's on purpose. I'm like, what? And he's like joking, obviously, but at the same time, he's being like, and I deep down, I know him, he's being serious. And I go, what are you talking about? He's talking about the Ohio thing that happened recently. And he goes, I go, people ride trains, right? And he goes, oh, I didn't even think about that. I just meant supply stuff. And I go, okay. All right. I'm starting to understand you. And he is still joking. I still don't agree with him, but I told him, I was like, show me what you're talking about. And he kind of started talking a little bit about it. And I think for the public, that was a clear moment of like, immediately that conversation could have ended. Most people would have just walked away, like, done with you, that type of thing. And you got to hear like, okay, now I'm starting to understand what he's trying to convey as a message. And now we can talk about that. That does not happen. And that was even hard for me to do. And I do a hell of a lot of these.
I mean, you engaged in dialogue. I mean, I say that there are three types of conversation. There's the most common, which is monologue, at least the most common in Western society, especially online, where it's just one person dominating, not really listening to anyone else, trying to win an argument. It's that very power-driven, I must win type of conversation. Then you have no-log, which tends to happen because of monologue, where people decide to agree to disagree and never again talk, at least about that subject, or maybe at all. So no-log can be very detrimental, but sometimes you kind of need no-log to step back from something so that you don't say something you regret or you don't spend too much time in monologue. Then there's dialogue, and dialogue is often held up as the one that we should all be striving for, because dialogue is at its core about respect and understanding. It's not about agreeing, it's not about winning or anything like that. It's meant to understand each other's perspectives. And in order to dialogue, that means you have to be aware of your own potential biases and how you're being shaped by your biases and how you're seeing reality and everything like that. And it also means you have to be willing to listen, even if what the other person says generates a very strong, visceral, emotional reaction from you. So it sounds like you were engaging in that dialogue. Instead of going into that situation and having that reaction of oh my God, what is this? I'm just going to stop. I can't deal with this right now. You wanted to understand more. And I think if we were better at teaching dialogue skills and at teaching how to listen to one another, how to ask questions and things like that for clarification, and not with the framework that, oh, if I'm listening to you, it must mean I agree with you, or I accept you, or I think you're okay in terms of what it is that you believe. But to recognize that, and I'm going to draw on some Buddhism here, basically, that idea of we're all suffering. Life is suffered. That's what it is. We have to have compassion for ourselves, for each other. Doesn't mean we have to agree with each other. It doesn't mean that we have to completely like each other. But we have to recognize that each person is dealing with something in their life that is leading them to where they currently are. And dialogue is a means by which to understand how that person got to where they are in that conversation with you.
Could I ask about limiting online profiles of fake accounts? Might be a good start of trying to connect with that dialogue again. I've noticed that like fake if people don't have their face or name attached to it. They are much easier to throw a jab at something or someone for a belief or something that was said because there's no ramifications on their account of finding out who they are.
Yeah, but then you just have to get rid of anonymity completely. But even if you get rid of anonymity completely, you still have possibilities of the asynchronicity and the distance causing the same problem. When a person is face to face, if they are thinking about the consequences of their actions and they're able to see the consequences of their actions, they're less likely to engage in the negative behavior. But online, yes, the anonymity, the ability to sit behind a fake account or set up sock puppets and bots that can do the attacking for you, that makes it easier. But what still makes it easy is you don't have to see the consequences of your actions because it's largely asynchronous and there's distance between you. So you may never see the consequences of your actions. The more that people engage in that type of negative behavior under those situational factors, then it could start spilling out to even when they're face to face. And I think we're seeing more of that now because so many protests now, they recognize that they're going to be recorded probably in some way. And so they're increasing their anonymity through any type of masking or bandanas or whatever it is that they're wearing. The more that you feel you cannot be connected to the consequences, the more you are likely to let kind of your core self go and allow and engage in these types of negative behaviors. Simply kicking out fake accounts, sock puppets, bots, things like that is not going to fix the problem. It might help because at least then you're not getting spammed with so many attacks and the harassment spamming can go down. But the individual who's at the core of all of that is they don't feel that there are any consequences and they don't feel the need to change. They're not going to change. They'll just find a different way to do it.
There's a point of wanting restrictions in the sense of not having spam or fake accounts or just people having ramifications sometimes for the things that they say. And I think honestly, it's like people take that to go, yeah, people for conspiracies should be. I was like, well, that's not what I mean by it. It's not like the whole limiting of speech. I do not agree with limiting speech. I think you need to have all conversations despite whether you disagree with them or not. If it's the person's belief, which more times than not, a person using a profile under their name, their account, their ID that has to go in to make that profile, whatever they're saying means that that's their belief. Now, you can take it into what context they are saying that. And sometimes it's a joke. Sometimes the joke doesn't land right and nobody laughs and they have to move on with it. But there's like this control of like dangerous speech. And I was like, it's the only way we learn. Like, I've been called or told many times in an episode that that's wrong. Correct me. Let's learn. That's the kind of the point of it. I don't have any conflicted notions, but I start to notice, I think, why people become aggressive is because in their belief and what their mindset is and what they've learned, they don't have any room for your information that they've already deemed invalid. And that's like the most, to me, it's just like, I don't know how, if that's a structure issue. I feel like that is a issue in our society, the continuous rolling on of echo chambers and other sources out there as well too. Plus, we have like really stigmatized words in this world where it comes to conspiracy. It comes to a lot of things where it's like you need to talk about these because like as much as I look at these protests, there's a large history out there as well too with agent provocateurs out there as well, where then you lump in all these protesters as being violent. And I'm not a protester. I'm not at any of that. I honestly just try and stay in my little world as well and move on, like, work routine lifestyle things like most people do. But I at least try and understand what that person's talking about. And the clips that get brought up show it in a polarizing way and doesn't understand the true motion of things to the public, to where it just creates a bigger divide. You have people like, and I would say political wise, people like on the conservative side that don't have time for a lot of the liberal stuff, people on the liberal side that hate all the conservative stuff. And it's like, man, you guys are passionate about two things in your own due respects. I was like, there's a way to be able to talk about this without it turning into, and sometimes I get caught in this, an intellectual chess match. I don't even know I'm in half the time. I'm talking to someone and then they're, what'd you mean when you said this? And I'm like, what? And they're like, did you say it like this because of this? And I'm like, no, 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 no. That's why I end up ranting and over explaining, because I'm trying to make sure you fully get the dialogue. And I've learned that from, sometimes people come on and they hear something that I've said before and think that's a viewpoint and don't ask me to elaborate, but hop right into it. But that's the world. That's the quick 10-second interaction with someone. They say good morning to you. Was it the way they said it? And I'm like, what? It's two words. Well, it's technically one. I don't know. I think it's two words, but they say good morning, and it's like the tone of what they say. Is it good morning or is it good morning? It's like, what's wrong with that guy?
Hmm. Yeah, I always found it funny. In graduate school, my mentor was talking about how she hates the question, "How are you doing? Good morning. How are you?" But we do it because it's like the social contract. We're kind of expected to say these things to one another, but we don't want to hear the truth when we say it. So now when people ask me, like when you're passing in the hallway, I'm usually like, meh, you know, and I might give them the truth and then see how they handle it. Oftentimes, we don't want to engage with honesty and authenticity. We often will say, well, there's something wrong about that person when they do so. And yet I have seen younger generations do pay more attention to this. At least my students do. They tend to want to see brands and celebrities and politicians and whatnot who are more honest. But then in understanding that, what tends to happen is brands and celebrities and politicians, they start performing an authenticity. So we've got these blurred lines now where we do not know what is authentic to the core person. And it's almost like the only time you do get that authenticity of what a person is really like is when they have the anonymity, the asynchronicity, and the distance. Because then if they don't feel that they're going to be evaluated and judged, they're going to be more likely to speak those more intimate core selves that, maybe one of the reasons why they don't want to have to do dialogue around that is because it's freeing. It's this freeing ability to be able to not be evaluated and judged and being able to just speak your core self. And we don't want to have to be, responsive to that. If we were better at allowing people to be their core selves in a lot of different situations, that might have a bigger impact than the platform saying, okay, well, we're going to limit you to one account or limit you to a real account. You have to use your real name, blah, 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 blah. A real name, that's just a part of who we are. And and I've done this where when Facebook said years ago that they were going to require real names, it just use names. You don't have to use your real name. You can still perform any way that you want. But until we get people who stop feeling the need to always be performing and we engage with the honest and the authentic, we're still going to be having all of these same problems. We haven't yet figured out how to combine these social media platforms that allow anyone to connect with anyone with authenticity and honesty. And that's a big challenge we really need to tackle.
When you define authenticity, could you possibly give me some examples? I can understand the fake authenticity. I like to think I'm authentic. I mean, I've done this every day for a really long time, and I'm pretty sure I'm consistently the same. I just don't. I don't have a radio voice. My voice is naturally this good and deep. Now, it's just I'm just me, and I would consider that probably ADHD. I noticed that with a lot of like if you go into like, and this is what I think is really good about social media. There's specific groups that you can actually, I felt a little bit more validated when I joined one, because I always kind of felt like there's a lot of social isolation that no one talks about with ADHD and things. Then I joined this group and I start seeing it everywhere. And I'm like, oh my God. I was like, I'm not just a crazy guy. This is normal for a specific group. And it does validate you. But that word authenticity, I mean, I try my best at times, and I know plenty of people that would probably be way better at it than me. But it's about finding, I guess, do we want that to be acceptable? Do we want authenticity? Does my generation really want it? Or are they just tired of being lied to? Because now that they're marketing for authenticity, and I would put this at the scale, which is companies that switch over their thing to a rainbow flag, and people start assuming that they actually believe in that. And I go, that's capitalism. And they found what you are attracted to. And if it is authenticity, then we have to not make that the priority anymore. I want people to be authentic, but also people like being lied to, sadly. And I don't know how to correct that. And I don't know any steps, if you've ever thought of any steps.
So
that was a loaded question. I'm sorry.
that was a loaded question. No, it's fine. There's a lot of different communication theories that we deal with. Two in particular that come to mind here. One is social penetration theory, and one is uncertainty reduction theory. Social penetration theory, the way it's commonly described is I usually go to the Shrek example of when, I don't know if you remember Shrek, when he first meets Donkey, and he talks about how Shrek, he's this onion because he has layers. And social penetration theory says that, we have maybe this core, authentic, most intimate self where we have our deepest hopes and fears and maybe our darkest thoughts and things and hopes and whatnot. But then we have all of these layers on top of that where it becomes more and more superficial information about ourselves as you get further out. So depending on who it is we're interacting with, we may be at a more superficial layer, or we may be at a more authentic layer. And then with uncertainty reduction theory, that one says, well, whenever we meet strangers or in a situation where we don't know what's going to happen, we feel anxious. That uncertainty makes us feel anxious, and we don't like that. So we do whatever we can to not feel anxious, which may mean falling back on stereotypes about another person based on how they look or how they sound. Or it may mean looking for more information to be able to get closer to that authentic self of the person that we're engaging with. And what I like to say is when you're online, it's harder to know where those lines are between the authentic and the superficial, and where it is then the performance. Because a lot of times with the online, each person is able to control how others are going to see them. So in a sense, everything is performance at that point. But some of it is still authentic performance because you're still conveying deeper fears and hopes and wishes and thoughts and things like that. So an example, and I don't like to use other people, so I usually just use mine. At the surface level, people might see me a certain way, and then I would say, okay, going down further, it's you may see me as woman. I call myself non-binary, so we can go deeper than that. But then we go even deeper than that, and I might talk about my body dysmorphia, about how much I feel like if I could just tear away my skin, I would get at the authentic self, the self that I see in my head. Those are the deeper, darker aspects. And there's actually deeper and darker than that still, which I'm not going to put public in a space like this. I haven't even made public with my partner yet. I've been with him for 13 years at this point. It's hard to get to that true, authentic, deepest layer of self because we feel that we're going to be judged, and we feel that it could be what ostracizes us. And since we're social animals and we don't like being ostracized, we usually keep that authentic self under wraps unless we're in a safe space for it. Now, that also means that if you are in a safe space for it, you might be bringing out that authentic self. And if it's an echo chamber safe space, that authentic self could be strengthened. And if it is a darker side, like if that's where your racism or transphobia or whatever it is, your ageism, whatever, if that's where it exists, having the echo chamber, especially online, would make that authentic self more likely to come out. Does that make sense?
Like an over-ramped version of oneself because of the bubble that they're kind of stuck in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And especially because we have to keep that inner self so shielded and under so many layers. When we are able to discard those layers, it is that freeing. It feels like that weight has been taken off the shoulders. And when we find others who agree with us, it can further push us into certain directions that maybe we wouldn't have gone in if we didn't have that type of acceptance. And what's weird is, on the one hand, this is how mental health therapy is meant to work. And on the other hand, this is how you can get to extremist groups, whether right or left, because an extreme, or what's seen as an extreme thought, becomes accepted, endorsed, and strengthened if it's in that type of echo chamber. So we love to be able to be our authentic selves, but we're also terrified of it at the same time. And once we're able to be it and not feel that terror, that freeing nature can be very helpful for us. But depending on what that freeing nature leads to, it could be very, very dangerous for the rest of the community.
You think there's an emotional point that someone has where they've reached pure authenticity? I'm body dysmorphic too. If I eat a French fry, I'll do 5 hours of cardio in the morning, and I'll smoke a cigarette right afterwards because I need one. I've worked out compulsively. It's a lot you come across in the fitness industry, which is a lot of eating disorders. I haven't eaten out at a restaurant in like 8 years, maybe once on my birthday, like 3 years in, and even then, I felt really bad, and I worked out excessively for 2 days right afterwards. All my friends know I'll never eat around them. I'll go a full day without eating. I won't eat around people. Um, it sucks, but that's something I got to come to grips with myself as well too. But do you think that people have to hit like an emotional low point? Like I've noticed it with like social isolation, my true self, and this is I like to think this is me. But I'm very more critical on myself than I am on anybody. There was kind of that about me. I think the wise words that was once said to me was people like the idea of me, not actually me. That rings in my head, and I heard that when I was like in 6th grade. So that's a big impact. But I feel like when I hit my point where it was like emotional low point, you kind of realize that like everything else, any idea, all of it, I'm like, you could be wrong. It doesn't matter. So I'm never 100% in. I am when it comes to things that I work hard towards, like a show or painting or doing something that I'm actively in, like a discussion. I'm here in this moment. But I just don't have any standpoint. I mean, I do have some standpoints, I would say, but I've never like 100% like anything this person is going to say that I know they're necessarily not going to agree with me with. I'm just going to let them talk, not listen, and then say what I'm going to say so they learn. I never come at it with that. And I've noticed it so much with my generation. Like, look, I've been in the 60s and 70s for like the past like almost year now, which is with the JFK stuff, but learning all about Nixon, Johnson, COINTELPRO, all this stuff. So many of my generation are activists like COINTELPRO in all this. I'm like, do you know what it actually entails? And then like I send them a document, the actual report on it from the church committee, and they go, whoa, this is way worse. And I was like, all right, if you got to be passionate about something, you should research into it as well too, and understand the both contexts of these situations, see how they're viewing it. And it's not easy for me to ever agree with the government, but I look at it from their standpoint, and then I look at it from a human standpoint, and then I look at it from my standpoint, and I try and find that balance. But that's not the world today. And I go, do you have to hit an emotional low point to get there? Do you have to feel like you have no value? So anything that you think or say can be wrong at any point in time? Or do you just have to communicate with more people and have more friendly interactions? But then what about the bad ones?
So on the one hand, I don't know if the world has ever been a place where we've been very good at, engaging with one another and engaging with all of this. But that's a different thing. I think that the really important thing to say is, and I always draw on the psychotherapy I was taught for my undergraduate degree. People don't go into therapy unless they feel they have to. Like, you can bring someone to therapy, but if they don't see the need to change, that therapy is not going to be effective for them. And usually it is similar to what you're saying, Ben. People have to reach a certain point where they're having that type of emotional distress, or they're ostracized, they're not connecting with anyone. They feel that something has gone wrong in their life and they need to make a change. And you can listen to emotional psychologists. They talk about how, depression and anxiety, they do serve a purpose. Depression is meant to help us understand something's not good in our life and we need to change it. And anxiety is meant to kind of do something similar, to have us be aware that something bad is going on so that we address it. So it's not like emotions like that don't serve a purpose. But what tends to happen is, and I can really only speak for the Western context, and especially the United States, we are so busy and so much stress is placed on us that we start off by ignoring these early warning signs. And what can happen is a person could get to a very low spot before they realize that they need to reach out. And this has been traditionally in the United States even worse for men who ascribe to the very traditional ideas of masculinity and rugged individualism and stoicism and, not being emotional or not needing anyone. So what has tended to happen is we see like women who are raised in, or people who are raised under the idea that you have to be feminine, you have to need others and things like that. They tend to be more willing to reach out when they're at that low point to go to something like therapy, versus men, if they're embracing that more toxic idea of masculinity, they are less likely to reach out for help when they're at that low point. And they might turn more to some type of substance, any type of drug or alcohol that can help them to not feel those things. Or if they do feel those things and they don't know what to do with it, those emotions of depression and anxiety can be rationalized into anger and hate. And then they might latch on to some type of community that will support those feelings, while being then ostracized from the community that might have helped them to deal with those feelings. That is another big issue that the United States hasn't fully addressed yet. And until we're better at dealing with our emotions, we're not really going to be able to.
Do you think that there's too much of a care problem and a less or a lacking of care as well too? There's like two sides again. It's always boils down to there's always a metaphorical good versus evil. I wouldn't say caring too much is a good thing or a bad thing. I wouldn't say caring not enough is a good thing or a bad thing. I just think there's a lot of people that have in anything just polarizing views, and we've never brought it to a point of trying to find a healthy balance in between. And I don't know if communication or conversation is necessarily the point. I'm a male mental health advocate. I have been, and I have gotten crap for that, surprisingly. Which
No,
I think
not surprisingly.
people should understand. I've been sexually abused in the workplace by a woman. Thank God witnesses were there, or nobody would have believed me. So it's about I've been through those experiences that a lot of people talk about certain situations, not as bad as certain situations, but if you don't take the time to ask me why I feel that way, you'll never know that those types of things, just things I don't really talk about. And there's probably an interest that you have out there that I would never guess in a million years, and I wouldn't know why. But then if I asked you about it and you explained, it would make a lot more sense. There's a lot of people would say unpopular opinion or a specific interest in building IKEA furniture. Sounds awful, but there's someone that likes doing it because to them, they had an experience when they were little working with their grandfather or something, and then the pieces kind of start like a puzzle start coming together a little bit. And I don't know, like, that's not something you would teach in an education system, I feel like. I don't know, I mean, maybe at a young age, it might sink in a little bit more. I see that with, like, the younger education system teachings, they start working with ADHD, it's a lot more known now than when I was in school. Before, they just locked you in a room and were like, "Let's isolate you from the class." Call it enrichment, which I didn't know until I was 20 that that was actually something different. Um, but there's a lot of teaching yoga, whatever it is, just to be able to help kids balance with their feelings. And I think that's important to talk about your feelings. You should anytime you feel low, so you don't end up, hurting yourself. But at the same time, it's got to be more structuralized as well, too. Something that it's okay if you're an adult and you're also learning it. I saw my grandfather hit a nail into his hand and he just made a huh, and then just stared at me and then gave me a head nod and walked away. And I was like, what? And I think back on it now, I was like, "Oh, man, that dude went through Vietnam. He went through so much stuff, and he never talked about any of that type of stuff." But it's a different time, and it's like catching people up on that page. And I think you can change people's perspectives if they're older and they have more ingrained ways of notions. I think it goes with, like, being a parent is a great example. If you have a kid, you don't have to have one, but if you have a kid, usually that person that you go, "That dude just did meth and was selling it like 2 years ago." Now he has a kid and his whole life is different. His whole attitude is different. You need to change like that. And I think that can be produced through whether you meet somebody or whether it's something in your life that can cause that.
I mean, all of that requires you to want to change. You have to be open to change. And there are a lot of people who, for a lot of different reasons, are not open to change. And a lot of it can come down to fear, the uncertainty, and not knowing what might happen. I mean, I know myself in therapy, I've been struggling with that idea of how much do I change because of the uncertainty behind it. I also think that, getting to your question about, too much or too little, we have a really huge problem of this either or fallacy thinking. We tend to think in binaries. You're either this or that. It's either more or less. And again, binaries are great because they help us to simplify things. And given all of the complicated, a lot of the things that we have to deal with in life, we want to be able to simplify and have these heuristics as much as possible to make it easier to live, to cope. But a lot of times, these types of binary thinkings, if they become too ingrained, they will shut down that openness because you're either this or that. There's nothing else in between. And if we were better at teaching the both and, a dialectical approach, so that, it's not just one thing or the other thing, it could be both things. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a lot more complicated than we thought of. Teaching, I think, like you were just talking about, teaching emotions and helping people to understand their emotions starting at a younger age would help with that. When I was in elementary school, this was in the 80s, we had a guidance counselor who came every week to class to teach us some lesson on social interaction or emotional literacy, what we would call now. I mean, back then it was, warm fuzzies and cold pricklies. That's how we were taught. But we were taught these things. We engaged with this type of material. And I wouldn't say that everyone I grew up with fully embraced those things, but the idea is to have an exposure at the public school level, because if they're not getting it at home, because it'd be great if everyone wanted the kids that they have, and unfortunately that's not the case. So if they're not getting it at home, they need to get it somewhere. And right now, it seems like a lot of the United States has fallen back on cartoons being the place where students get that, so that they don't have to deal with it in the school system themselves. Or they believe that the students' parents and or religious institution is doing it. And we're so focused on getting students to pass a standardized test that we're not teaching these other very important lessons that need to be taught at a younger age, when it can have a stronger and longer impact.
I went to school I went to community college, but I was going for eventually going to go for psychology was the main goal. So I just got my associate's degree and just stopped going because I only went to college because someone told me I wasn't college material. And they knew that's how you get Robbie to do something, is you say you can't do it, and then he does it. Um, I got a problem with authority. But I actually learned more from doing the show than I've done doing and probably anything in the education system. And I'm not putting down the education system. There's just a large the intellect basis, like the learning properties, the methods as well too. It was just a different form for me to be able to soak up information compared to doing it in this free style where my individual thought might seem random, but it connects somehow. But the it's that I wouldn't call it ivory tower syndrome, but there is that in academia. And I've noticed that. And I'm not saying you at all. I'm not. I'm just saying you've probably noticed it in academia, which is just a lot of people that either it's a quick dismissal. And I think it's weird because I've seen it change, not like in the course of time, but in a single person, in an instance where I can say something and there's no value to what I just said. But then someone who's 90 years old says it, and it's immediate respect and value to what that person says. And I go, he just said the same thing as me, but there's the disconnect. And it's like, I don't know if that's experience. I don't know if that's visual of wisdom, which comes with years or time or life lived. And I just go, oh God, it's like, I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts would be on that. It's kind of a random aside question, but I've noticed that and it makes me feel like I'm nuts because I'll say it to someone like my age, like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm just like, oh my God, it's real. I'm telling you.
Well, I mean, part of it is we have all of these stereotypes and traditions that inform our assumptions and expectations for communication. So when we're talking with older individuals, there are a lot of cultural assumptions that older individuals have the experience, they have the wisdom, and you should be more respectful and listen to them. We also have assumptions that academics are smarter and experts, so they know what they're talking about, so you should listen to them. And it becomes a problem, though, and I can speak specifically to the academic issues because I've railed against this for years now, where academics tend to want to separate themselves out as experts and to demonstrate how they are experts by the way that they talk, by the way that they engage with students. And it took me a year or so teaching here to realize that I was teaching my students as if I was trying to create mini me's. So I was trying to make them like me, which is, someone who loves school as so much that she decided to become a part of it. That's me. And I had to realize, okay, well, that's not my students. I'm not going to talk down to my students. I'm not going to treat my students as uninformed or illiterate or incapable because they don't want to be me. I'm going to reach out to my students where they are at. And so I don't do exams. I don't do lectures. I try to have these discussions and dialogues. I require my students to come to class with questions based on what I give them, so that instead of me lecturing what I think they need, and then, oftentimes what happens is I just face the glazed eyes and people not paying attention. Instead, I see it as a dialogue. I want them to come to me with questions, indicate what they don't understand so that we can talk about it. Because I could just give them what I think they need, and it may not be at all what they need, or I might be talking down to them because they already understand all of that, but they don't understand this other part. And I think oftentimes academics tend to think that they have to talk in these big words and they have to be, sound complicated, and you have to be distant and be above and all of these things and exist in that ivory tower in order to be objective and be able to be critical. But in the case of doing so, in the process of doing so, we lose out on the emotional human being that it is that we're engaging with. We start to think of them just as a student who has this bucket that we can dip and pour our knowledge into, and then once they're full up, they're ready to go. No, that's not how humans work. We have to take in information, connect it with what we already know, and we have to wrestle with it. We have to make mistakes. We have to fail with it. And too much of our education system in the United States is not set up for all of that. We operate in the idea that each student is just an empty bucket, and all we have to do is pour stuff into that bucket. And oftentimes what happens then is people turn against us because in some way we're dehumanizing them. And that's not going to help any of us in the long run.
I think it leads to another dangerous outcome, which is what I started to notice with speaking with lawyers and things of sorts, and even noticing certain court trials as well too. It is not. It's a game. That's all it is. There's no finding the truth. It's about finding there's a winner and there's a loser, and I'm not going to be the loser. And you'll do whatever it takes, whether it's hide evidence. And I think we've all seen it on plenty of trials as well too. Just not talk about that evidence that you do know about, but try and go to other points of questions. And I go, what about just finding the correct path? Well, that's not profitable. And then we get back into the whole money-making system again, too. But that's a really dangerous outcome that impacts a lot of people's lives. I've had plenty of people on the show that have spent 20-something years wrongfully in prison that ended up being exposed later and then getting out and being like, well, there's 20 years of my life gone. I'm like, you don't want that to happen. And as much as people say, well, like, it's not really an issue, it's like, it isn't until it happens to you. And then when it does, and it will be an issue. And I like trying to make people aware of that. It's like, even if I talk about conspiracy stuff or I research into something, I make sure I have everything that is like historically, factually accurate. I might entertain on my show some, and I know I give you a lot of credit for talking to me on my show, because I'm sure you could probably look at a couple episodes and be like, oh God, no, but I really try my best to like either make it enjoyable for me as well too. I'm doing these things a lot of the times, but I also like knowing correct information. I like learning about government stuff. I like learning about history. I like learning about this. And then being able to educate on the outcomes as well too. There's the attention span thing in today's society. It leaks into everything. And I would think it would just be my generation or younger generations. No, it's the older generations I'm starting to notice as well too. Just people not having the time for it. And I think if like, something could happen horrible today and we might forget about it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it moves on at a quicker pace. And I think that's what people mean when they say time is moving by really quickly. It's like we're just not soaking it up anymore. I've noticed it myself. There's plenty of moments where I'm like, oh my God, it's 6 p.m. What did I do? I played a game on my phone. That was it. And that was my whole day. And then I feel like that causes you not to want to go out and explore and talk to people and do whatever you're going to do, whether it's a horrible interaction at a grocery store. And I've had plenty. Oh God, the woman that hit my heel with her shopping cart, she deserved everything I was thinking, but I didn't say it because I'm nice. But there's really like a horrible kind of discourse now that's happening where it's just you're going on the wrong path. And when I mean the wrong path, I'm not saying go turn to a Bible. I'm just saying we're just staying in our homes now. It's not good. I don't know if that was because of pandemic related stuff, obviously probably helped it out a little bit, but we're just not doing. All my friends that are in their 20s, I rather sit at home and drink. I'm like, I don't want to go to a bar either, but I think it's the whole going out experience, which is what we should be going after, or it's watching Netflix, or it's getting off work and not wanting to drive to a friend's house. And I'm starting to notice that with younger kids too, except now it's becoming more of a alcohol related issue as well too. Kids in their 22, 21 years old, and they're not going to a bar. They're just going home and then getting wasted. And it's like, that seems cool. And I'm glad you're safe and not driving. But at the same time, you're also creating a habit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and a lot more alcoholism is going to involve non-social drinking because you have no one around you to help you to moderate it. And there's nothing else that you're really doing. It's kind of like overeating being an issue when you're binging television or you're just doing something else. It's that mindless consumption, which is definitely an issue. And part of it, as much as I find my therapy interesting, and I've talked with other people about this a couple weeks ago, a lot of times you hear that the ways that we're supposed to be coping, the ways that we're supposed to be therapeutically dealing with things, is that it's in response to some type of stress in our life. And our lives have gotten increasingly stressful, whether it is jobs not paying enough, or not being there, or not being able to do what you want to do because you have to have a job because, all of these things are costing so much money, or it's not finding someone that you can feel comfortable with. It's not being able to be your authentic self. And that's not even on top of all of the pandemic, nuclear war, all these other climate change, all of these larger civilization possibly altering issues. There's a lot of stress in our lives. And a lot of times therapy seems to be focused on, okay, well, you can't stop the stress. So this is just, here are some tactics, and this is how you handle the stress, whether it is through some type of behavioral changes or cognitive changes or pharmaceutical changes or something, even biochemical, chiropractic, whatever you want to do. We have all of these means by which to help people handle the stress rather than work to stop the structures in our lives that are causing the stress. So I think I'm coming back to the point where unless we have this type of collective action to change our structures, it's also not going to get any better. And we're going to continue to see people struggling as individuals with how to cope with stressors that should be coped with as a collective. And as much as I love social media and online technologies and all of these various things, they keep us apart from one another. And news media, and I'm not a conspiracist, even though I grew up on the X-Files, so I have that mindset in me. But you have all of these attacks on education. You have news organizations that, like you said earlier, are not fully engaging with complex issues. So we're being constantly bombarded by stressors. We're not being brought together and taught how to collectively act. We do not have any incentives to collectively engage with one another because you can sit at home and play your games and watch your Netflix and do all these things. So the more that our collective action is being suppressed, the harder it is going to be for people to get together to change the structures that we have in life that are causing our stress. Because we're not even collectively engaging one another now to deal with the stress. We're increasingly being told it's an individual problem, that you need drugs, or you need meditation, or you need dialectical behavior therapy, or you need something you do by yourself. It's not something that as a collective we try to do to make things better.
Sorry, my brain got stuck on one thing you said, which was the stress reliever through chiropractics. And I slept on my neck like a month ago, really wrong. And it was messed up for like 4 days. I felt really like, I was like, this is it. This is where everything starts going downhill. I look like the person from the mesothelioma commercial where their head's like painfully twisted. And I was so afraid to pop it that when I actually like went like that and I heard it crack, I immediately started going like checking my hands and everything to make sure. I'm not a chiropractic guy. That scares me. But stress relievers, I'm pretty sure we have all those in every single outlet of our life. Somebody's picked up something along the way of being able to find a way that copes. This is it for me. It's coping. This is a stress reliever. But when it comes like into having the conversation and when it comes into opening up the discourse channel of things, like especially about education system, like I have every right to hate the education system for my just educational path with ADHD and just so much crap where it was like, don't go to school anymore. Cause we didn't back. It sounds like I'm not that old, but I'm 25, but it sounded like when I was in school, there was a real gap in knowledge on ADHD and they've made a lot of progress, but I also don't hate it. I just think we need to start talking about things. What's ways we can improve, like suggesting new methods. And then there's a trauma that comes in, which is people immediately, when you start suggesting ways that we can move forward, they start going, well, you're not letting go of the past. Like, I was like, well, here's how it rolls. If this happened when I was in school, okay, and they don't get past that. I go, well, if this happened when I was in school, let me finish. Then we move forward and we progress. And we start doing these. Let's not do this because it happened to me right back here. Let's do this because it happened to me like right here. But it comes off, especially if you're on that side of being like, you're just rehashing the past. It's like, what are you picking out of? The question is, I'm telling you, this was what happened. This is how we fix that. There's the ending goal we should reach towards. I get that so much with like friends or something. I'll talk about something and they'll be like, "Oh, you're still rehashing that?" I'm like, "No, no, no. It's so we don't make the same mistake again. We don't end up being on the beach with a car that's out of gas when we've made the mistake before. Let's learn from that." It's like, "Oh God, let it go." It's like, no, that's not what that is.
Well, I think part of it is, and again, focusing on Western context, United States, I think we have the wrong idea as to what adulthood is. Because we start off as a kid, of course. And the kid, the younger you get, it's going to be the most authentic self you're ever going to be in life. Because what tends to happen is the more that you interact with others, the more trauma that you experience, you start to develop those layers around you. And as you go forward, you're developing more and more layers. And some of them are becoming calloused, some of them are becoming tougher. And an adult basically is this little kid who's just walking around with all these layers, all of these calluses. And sometimes to cope with that, we then take that approach where I'm an adult now. I don't have to deal with the past anymore. I don't have to deal with my emotions. I'm past all of that. And that's not true, because you're still just that little kid, that you're still that authentic self from way back when. All of the things that happen to you, and they develop who you are. Your choices are, of course, how you respond to all of that, and that can have a big impact too. But you're still choosing in reaction to something that is happening to you. And your choices combined with those situations, that's what's producing all of these layers that you then come out and say, oh, I'm an adult now. And we start thinking, okay, well, we don't have to do anything more. We don't have any more layers we have to put on. At some point, we're mature and things like this, and we can stop growing, and we don't have to be open-minded and all these things. And that's all BS. You're constantly changing as you go through life. You're either putting on more layers because of your choices and how you're interacting with the world around you, or you're trying to take down those layers and trying to get back to your authentic self. But it's a constant movement. We tend to think that once you reach a certain age, oh, you're done. You don't have to worry anymore. And I think telling people that makes them stop progressing, makes them stop growing. Even though they see themselves as they don't have to anymore, and so they're not going to. Which is very problematic, because then it gets back to that very binary thinking of, oh, I know this one thing to be true, and I'm not going to accept that there are any challenges to that. I don't accept that there's anything outside of my one thing that's true. It's either true or false. There's nothing else. And the more that we engage in that type of myth about life, the more it's just going to cause problems where people don't want to talk to one another.
God, I got to introduce you to one of my structural figures in my life. That their answer to everything is life sucks. Get over it. I'm like, damn. You don't need that in life at all. It's the worst thing in the world. And it's in the worst moments I was given that advice. But I think you learn the opposite of that. You're like, oh, hey, don't listen to that. Do the opposite of what that.
But life does suck. I mean, that is the
100%.
truth. I mean, life is suffering. But it doesn't mean that the way that you live life has to suck. And I think if all you're thinking is, oh, life sucks, get over it. No. Yeah, we know life is going to end with death. That's a fact. We're all facing that. And as you get older, you start thinking about it a lot more. But that doesn't mean that you're just going to have to be sitting around here miserable waiting to die, or even worse, taking actions to make that happen faster. I was thinking about that myself recently. And I've had a very stressful past 3 years. And I started joking to myself that, oh, I'm just going to engage in a hedonist suicide and just, not take care of myself. And then I was like, well, that's a very slow way to kill
I've been saying for years that I was going to make it to 26 and that was it. But I'm at 25 and I'm like, oh, shit, I guess I'm going to have to pay the piper in the next year.
And that's the thing, though. I think a lot of people realizing that death is coming, they just start engaging in behaviors to hasten it because in some way they think their life is suffering, life sucks. What does it matter? I'm just going to do what I want to do. And they start to live a life that just reinforces. It's that, I can't remember the name of it, but it reinforces that idea that life sucks. They make their life suck and they shorten their life in the process. But we can understand, yeah, life sucks. Life sucks for everyone. And you can be the richest person. You're still going to die. Your life is still going to suck at that point. Life sucks. But living life doesn't have to suck. And I don't think we're doing enough to talk about that aspect. And so people who say life sucks, gets over it, and the people who do that type of hedonist suicide where they have all these various drugs that they use, and I'm not even talking like hard drugs, but sugar, watching television, not interacting with anyone, those are also going to be in some way drugs. But if people are just doing that, there's some pain, something has happened in their life that has caused so many layers, so many calluses that they are being crushed by life. And they would be helped if they could talk, if they had that safe space in which to get back to their authentic self. But because we have so many stereotypes about talking and seeking help are the wrong things to do, especially for certain populations, those individuals are just going to continually suffer and their suffering is going to get worse. And because pain is also a contagion, they might bring others down with them. And so if we can figure out what the pain is and address that contagion, it's not just better for the individual, it's better for all the individuals around them and perhaps around the entire world, given how interconnected we all are.
I can't add anything else more value to what you just said, but I agree 100%. 100% agree. But I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show and be able to engage me in the conversation as well too. I enjoyed it very much. Is there a place where people can find your links?
Yes, I have a website, playingwithresearch.com, because I think it's funny. And I am on Twitter. I believe it's CD Reinhard. You look up CarrieLynn Reinhard, you'll find me. I also have a TikTok. That one's not as easy to find because it's a weird name. But I'm on TikTok and Twitter, and I definitely have my own blog and website.
And I'll make sure I link all your links in the description as well for people to be able to click on. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.